Hello, and welcome to Attached Together, the podcast where we explore attachment theory and what it really means for counsellors, psychotherapists, and psychologists in practice. Created by the team at Optima, providers of the Level 5 and Level 7 diplomas in attachment-based psychotherapy, this podcast is a space to deepen your understanding, reflect on your work, and stay connected to the heart of attachment-informed practice. I'm Darren, a counsellor and attachment-based psychotherapist in private practice. Alongside hosting this podcast, I teach on the Level 5 course at Optima. Hopefully that richness of experience comes through in the conversations we have. And a quick note before we begin, our episodes now come with a CPD certificate. If you'd like to access it, simply head to our website. Joining me for the third and final time this season is Jo Oxley, therapist, supervisor and tutor at Optima. Jo, you've chosen for us to explore attachment and food. Where do we begin?
Oh, well, first of all, thanks for having me back, Darren. It's really lovely to spend some time with you again. Yeah, I think when we think about food, we often think it's about nutrition or dieting or health. And I guess what we're thinking about here is eating, but from maybe a disordered perspective. So disordered eating rather than eating disorders. Mm-hmm. So when we think about food from an attachment perspective, food carries a much deeper story. As a counsellor, we'll know that many of our clients' patterns begin long before they had the language to describe what they were feeling, for example. And feeding is one of the earliest relational experiences that we'll ever have. So long before those words, there's hunger, there's discomfort, there's distress. And hopefully someone comes along with some nourishment or some warmth and the capacity to soothe that distress. Whether it's the breast or bottle, this moment provides an opportunity for intimate connection. And in that connection, I guess there's that skin to skin contact, that gaze, that touch, the facial expressions, and the voice, those little sounds that we make. And that all goes towards creating oxytocin, the bonding hormone. And that gets stimulated in these interactions between the baby and the caregiver. And I guess if it's all going well, the caregiver and the infant begin to find a rhythm, if you like, in one another through responsiveness and through attunement. The infant then begins to organise their sense of safety. When I'm distressed, somebody comes, it feels better, I don't need to be distressed. Mm-hmm. So these repeated experiences become internalised, becoming part of the infant's developing expectations about themselves, about relationships, about whether their needs will be picked up, noticed, tuned into. Will somebody come? Or do I need to start to manage things on my own? We've talked about, haven't we, in a previous podcast about internal working models. So I think food then becomes a really complex attachment figure, substitute.
Mm. I can really feel that within even just the short examples that you've given there, that sense of what can be relied on and then what can't.
Yeah, and a lot of it is about that early experience of being fed as well. Has the caregiver made space for the baby to have a good feed? Or is it rushed? Or, I don't know, do you remember the film 3 Men and a Baby?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do, vaguely.
Yeah, poor baby's trying to be fed by 3 loving but utterly baffled men, adults. Milk's everywhere, there's confusion about what this baby might need, and nobody is quite in sync with the baby's rhythm. And whilst it's funny on screen, it actually really shows us something quite profound, I think, about feeding. That it isn't just about food, it is actually about that relationship. So, as you rightly say, this really highlights the difference between mechanical feeding, so i.e. a baby being propped up and a bottle being propped up with a cushion, as opposed to, the caregiver taking time to hold the baby, to nourish the baby. So, that really starts to get this pattern of, are my needs important? And that gets linked with food. And I think it can go even more kind of deeper than that in terms of, I don't know, let's try a little experiment, just you and I. Cast your mind back to your memory of the dinner table when you were younger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've got a memory.
Mm-hmm. So we can do with this with clients as well, to try and find out, what is their kind of relationship with food and where did that start. And when I cast my memory back to the family dining table, often what we see gets played out is the relational dynamics of the family get played out at the table.
It's like you're in my mind, Jo. That's my memory. That is literally my memory of, and actually, weirdly, it's my memories of being at my grandma's table, and the wider family all being sat around together, and the dynamics that then played out, and the role that my grandma took in nurturing all of us and showing her care through the food that she gave.
And that's often the case, is that care is shown through food. Or we might have at the dinner table, that is a arena, if you like. If there's bullying in a family, that will get played out at the table. And then that, again, can create quite a complex dynamic with food. Food can be, like you said, a symbol of care. And that in itself can sometimes mean that we develop a disordered eating or unhealthy relationship with food, in terms of we might be trying to get something back. Food's associated with that feeling.
Yeah, that nourishment that comes from food can be wider than just the nutrients itself. That's really loaded in meaning, isn't it, sometimes? And actually, I'm going to take this off in a slightly different direction, because there's two things you've said, and the thing that's popped in my mind both times: mobile phones, baby in caregiver's arms, propping the bottle up. Are they gazing at the baby or are they gazing at their phone? The family sat at the table. Do families now interact at dinner, or are the youngest children propped up with iPads? I mean, you see this when you go out to dinner, don't you, sometimes? A family will be sat together, and actually the way that the older members of the family get some peace to eat their dinner, or perceived peace, is to placate the child with a tablet or a mobile phone or an electronic device of some description. And it just spikes through any chance of interaction.
100%. And Linda talks about this in her book, Linda Cundy, that is, Love in a Digital Age. And you just kind of sparked a memory for me. We took the two eldest granddaughters out for lunch some weeks ago, and my husband said, well, is it a good idea to take them into a pub for lunch? And I said to him, well, how else are they going to learn how to interact and how to be in a pub or in a restaurant? And there certainly were no mobile phones. We played games at the table while the food was waiting to come. We did colouring, but we had a thoroughly great time, and I think they really enjoyed it too. You often look around, families dining together, and the majority of people are on a phone. But maybe that's something that we could perhaps do in another.
Yes, a big topic
take that
to
deeper.
Yeah,
it is a big topic to unpick. Yeah. So just coming back then to disordered eating, certainly in my practice with clients, I've had clients who struggle with their weight, for example. They yo-yo from one diet to another, and all of the time in this yo-yoing, there's a underlying theme that they're having to give up something which is a treat. They're having to deny themselves something. And actually that's quite a dichotomy in itself, isn't it? Because if you think that part of the dieting process is because you're not happy with perhaps, the weight that you're carrying, but in your mind, food is a treat. There's a bit of a, what's this, mismatch, isn't there? And doing something healthy for our bodies, i.e. treating our bodies in a healthy way, often is seen as, yes, but to do that, I'm denying myself something. I'm not allowed a treat. And yet actually, the treat, if we look at it from a really rational perspective, the treat is treating yourself in a healthy way and being happy with how you are in your body. If we're not happy in our bodies and we feel uncomfortable in our bodies, but it gets really complicated, doesn't it? So going back to the feeling of the table and what you said about your granny nurturing with food, then food is then used to try and create that nice feeling, but also on the other side of things, a bit like alcohol is used, food can be used to soothe. So if we can't find another way to soothe, then we might use food as a soother.
Yeah, it's only fairly recently that I came across the term food addiction. And at first that seems counterintuitive because we all need to eat food. We often associate addictions with things that we can do without and that do us harm. Whereas food obviously does an awful lot of good. It keeps us going. However, when you look at food through the lens that you've just described, you can see how a food addiction comes about, because it's about self-soothing and not having the internal resources and inner security to meet our own needs. So actually, being comforted with food, and we even call certain foods comfort foods, don't we? For me it would be sweet stuff. I've got a really sweet tooth. For my husband it would be crisps or savoury foods. No matter what that is, actually, if you're seeking comfort and you can find it in food, then that's going to be a place that you go to. And thus leads us to disordered eating. That's not an eating disorder in and of itself. Obviously it could lead that way. It could lead to binge eating or bulimia, or even go the other way with anorexia. However, actually, I think many people listening to this will recognise that feeling of, oh God, it's a bit of an afternoon slump. I need a bit of sugar as a pick-me-up, or we go straight to food. And I've tried really hard as a foster carer to avoid using food as a reward or even as a comfort. But for me, myself, it's like, oh, I've done really well, let's go for a meal. Someone in the family's achieved something, or it's a birthday, we'll get a huge birthday cake, or it's, someone's feeling poorly, oh, okay, we'll send them some brownies in the post. Like, food is so intrinsically linked with, oh, I've had a dreadful day, oh, okay, I'll tell you what, let's get a takeaway, let's not bother cooking tonight, we deserve a treat. Food is so wrapped up in our emotions.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me why you're saying that, given what you shared about the experience of the dinner table and your kind of association with food is that nurturing. I guess, certainly from my own experience, I really realised one day I was standing at the fridge with the fridge door open, just staring into the fridge, trying to find something. And then I started saying to myself, what is it? What's going on here? What's happening for me? And I realised this was my stress response. I felt stressed, so I went to the fridge. I was looking for something to soothe. But I knew myself, if I found something, like you say, sugary, or, maybe that was calorie laden, as soon as I'd eaten that, then the guilt and the shame would start. So I think from a working with this with clients, it's unpicking, what happened at the dinner table, what behaviour, what association what does food mean for this client? What's the story here? Because, like with any addiction is it's a solution to a problem. And I always say, how clever our clients are, that they come up with, or they found a way to survive. But like you say, Darren, it's associated often with a reward, with a treat. And it's about working with our clients to work out how else can you reward yourself? How else can you get that feeling? Because that's short-lived, that food. It's a very short-lived moment, a bit like alcohol, or taking cocaine, for example. Once that high's come, that's it. It's over. What's more beneficial is to work out what the problem is. So for me, with the fridge, I'm stressed. I actually don't really need any food. What I need to do perhaps is to go and do some breathing, or go for a walk, or connect with somebody, have a conversation with someone. I worked with a client very similar to you. Her whole was a big family, and the dinner table, when she drew it and described it, it sounded fantastic. It sounded a really warm, nurturing, happy. And what she realised in one or two sessions, very, very quickly, was the food. She was trying to get back to that big family. But her family hadn't left her. She'd moved into her own house, and her family weren't readily available, but they were available. And so just by bringing that to mind, that, when she was looking for that feeling, she could just pick up the phone, or she could arrange to go and have a coffee, and that started to be the process. And very, very quickly, she started to shed some of the weight that she was wanting to get rid of, because she was no longer using food as a way of soothing this uncomfortable feeling.
Now, I have my own hunch. I'm wondering where yours lies with this. Is there a certain attachment style that's going to be more prone to disordered eating?
It's a really good question. I've never really given this much thought. Where I'm tending to lean to straight away is maybe someone who's a bit more avoidant, because they're looking for something that they can control and they can get and they can manage themselves, rather than going outside to find someone else to help them soothe. So that's my gut knee-jerk reaction. What's yours?
It's really interesting, because working from the basis that actually a secure attachment is going to be far more able to internally resource. So therefore I'm thinking, okay, of the insecure attachments, where would that sit? And my mind actually went to a preoccupied attachment style, because when we're dealing with a child that's anxious, ambivalent, and that's sort of seeking comfort from external places, actually food is an external resource. So although in one way it could be regarded as that independent avoidant, actually in another way. So I'm wondering actually, Jo, whether this isn't really about one style or another, but how it probably plays out and shows up or how it develops could be completely different. So for a preoccupied adult, that could well be trying to seek back some of that comfort that they've had a taste of, and they're trying to chase that back. But for an avoidant, it's not been developed in that way. It's been developed in okay, well, someone isn't there for me, but I know what works for me and I'll go and sort myself out. It leads to the same end result, but actually the underlying triggers and the causalities are completely different. And I guess that's where an effective counsellor really needs to be in the client's world rather than making assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so before we head off to the break, what's the takeaway? Oh God, that's pun not intended. What is the one thing that you'd like people to remember from this conversation that they've listened to?
I think therapeutically, when we are with a client who talks about food, maybe we can pick up on some of that yo-yo conversation. 1 minute food's a treat, the next minute there's shame. We really need to be thinking about, what is this serving? What attachment figure perhaps is this food providing for this client? And then to help the client make sense of that story based on their early experiences, perhaps around the dinner table, perhaps around being propped up, perhaps around food being used as a reward, for example. And I think with anything, Bowlby says about us becoming storied selves. I think once we can understand the story and the trigger, a bit like me with the fridge, as soon as I understood it, I no longer go to the fridge, which is quite a relief for me, because that's something which I didn't want to do, really. I didn't want to keep putting food into my body that wasn't going to do me any good and then feel that guilt and that shame. So yeah, I think that's my takeaway.
Wonderful. I feel full from that conversation and thoroughly nourished. So thank you very much, Jo.
Let's
have a break and then we'll be back with our dilemma.
If you've been carrying the emotional weight of your work lately, feeling stretched, tired, or a little disconnected, you're not alone. That's exactly why we created Restoring Your Secure Base, an attachment-informed therapist retreat designed to give you the space to pause, breathe, and reconnect with yourself, your work, and a community of therapists who truly understand. Across 2 days, you'll step away from the everyday into a calm, restorative environment at the Odney Club near Maidenhead in Berkshire. A beautiful setting that even inspired the world of The Wind in the Willows. We're also honoured that Linda Cundy will be joining us for a special talk and Q&A. The retreat includes workshops, shared reflection, experiential learning, 8 hours of CPD, and restorative experiences and a gong bath. Most importantly, it's a chance to reconnect with yourself and with a community that understands the work you do. To learn more and reserve your place, visit optimahealthservices.co.uk/therapist-retreat.
So we are back with our dilemma. And this is very related to the conversation we've just been having, Jo. So I'm wondering what you're going to make of this. The client who arrives to sessions with food in hand and sits and eats during the counselling session.
That's a really difficult situation, isn't it? If a client then asks you if you mind whether they start eating their breakfast in the session, or if they get their packed lunch out halfway through a session. Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I guess, if we really get curious about what's going on. Now, it could be that the client maybe has low blood sugar and the appointment's very early and they've taken children to school, and etc., etc. I perhaps would say, yeah, okay, if you really do need to eat, then please go ahead. But can we have a conversation about what's going on? What's happened that you need to have your breakfast or your lunch in the middle of our session? And then just have a talk around that as to maybe what we could do in the future. What is going on. But, another thing, it could be that they're so anxious, and if they're using food to soothe, they've brought their self-soothing mechanism into the therapy room. So it may be then that you do, as a therapist, want to work with that. What's it like? What are you feeling before you take a mouth of that? What are you feeling as you're swallowing it, as you're eating it? What's happening in your body now? So, and then we could perhaps, expand that as to what else could you do rather than just shutting it down and, you mustn't bring food into the... So I guess it's a dilemma. And I guess it will depend on the comfort as well as the therapist, to actually slow it down, really take a back seat and then work with it. I guess that's my feeling. What's your thoughts?
Well, it's only on hearing you speak. I tell you what, I'm wondering about the client's sense of self-worth and what are they prioritising above themselves. Why is it that they haven't had time for a meal, and why is it that they maybe aren't using the therapy space as fully as they might? What's the block there? Maybe they're avoiding something. Maybe by bringing the meal in, that's a distraction, and this could well be within their knowledge, but more likely not in their subconscious, and they're unaware of what they're doing. And I think I'd be drawn to working with how, their sense of how they prioritise themselves and how they take care of themselves, and really what a counselling session means to them. What are they here for? I think that would be my starting point, but it's a really tricky one.
The other thing that's I've just pinged off in my head is, when we perhaps work with younger people, the younger person might say, can my mum come in the room, or can my dad come in the room, my caregiver come in the room? And if that food represents an attachment figure, then they are literally bringing their attachment figure into the room, aren't they?
Well, especially who made the food? What meal is it? Who prepared it? Was it made by mum? Was it made by your husband? What does that represent?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpick. I think I'd be asking quite a few questions and really sitting and noticing what the answers are and unpicking it. I mean, actually, what starts off as oh my word, what's going on, could be really, really fruitful, couldn't it?
Fruitful. Very good.
Yeah, back with the puns. I can't help it.
Yeah, I think once you put those attachment goggles on and we start to look at things from an attachment lens, then we can see things very differently. And I know in a lot of core training, perhaps the message would be that's not acceptable. But actually, I think we need to be a bit more open-minded with that and a bit more broad-minded as to what does this represent? What is this behaviour telling us? Because we know, don't we, that all behaviour is a form of communication. So if we are curious about what's being communicated or what's being used here to soothe, etc., then I think it could be a really interesting piece of work.
Yeah, it could. Okay, before we say goodbye, Jo, we're recruiting for courses currently that start in September. So it's the level 5 diploma, CPCAB, and then the level 7. And the level 7, remind me, what does that cover?
So level 7 kind of gave birth to itself from the level 5. Lots of students who had done our level 5, they were wanting to do more. They were talking about doing clinical supervision or working with couples. And along with scoped, obviously, if people want to get senior accreditation, then I developed the level 7 to kind of tick a lot of those boxes. So we do a module on clinical supervision. You'll be fully qualified with a diploma in clinical supervision. Couples therapy, and we cover emotional focused therapy. We cover the Gottman model, the PACT model, as well as an attachment focused couples therapy model. We satisfy the research element for senior accreditation by doing a systematic review. And what that means is you systematically, so it's a process, review whatever evidence is out there that would answer your research question. So you came up earlier with a fantastic question about food and attachment styles. And so you would pull together loads and loads of research, and then you kind of whittle that down to maybe 10 or 11 or 12 papers. And then you look at those in depth. And from those researchers, you systematically review that to give yourself a new insight, if you like, to how we might work with that, what it means, etc., etc. And there's also the fourth module of the level 7 is on learning to work with religious trauma, because I think that comes into our therapy room far more than we realise. And part of that is we teach a little bit of EMDR. It's called a flash technique. So you've got some tools to be able to calm a nervous system, and a client doesn't never have to talk about their trauma, but using the flash they can then start to process that trauma. So it's kind of we wanted it to be an all-encompassing course that gets you a level 7, but also qualifies you to be a clinical supervisor, a couples therapist, and be able to read and understand research in a nutshell.
That is thorough and full. and all of that is achieved, much like level 5, one academic year, start in September, finish around June or July. And so within 2 years, in theory, someone could do the level 5, then progress to the level 7, and look what you've got at the end of it. I mean, that's a sensational offer. If what we're talking about now has perked your interest in any way, please head to our website, optimahealthservices.co.uk. All of the information you need is on there, and you can get in touch, and one of us could happily meet and chat with you one-to-one and talk you through the qualification. But for now, a huge thank you to everyone for listening, and an even bigger thank you to you, Jo, for joining us yet again for another episode. It's been great to have you here. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for now, and I'll see you next episode. Thanks.
And now you can claim your free CPD certificate. You can either go to our website or look at the show notes and you'll find the link.